welcome the California State President of Bank of America, Janet Lampkin.
Thanks very much, Jim, and good morning, everybody. It's certainly a pleasure to be here today to introduce for you the next panel, which will be talking about infrastructure in the 21st century. I'm going to let the experts talk about what the new infrastructure is and how it's going to work, and the challenges and the opportunities that lie ahead as we gear up for a world that will include smartphones and tablet computers, immense data storage and manipulation, homes and vehicle businesses that run on renewable energy, and all kinds of things that we can't even dream of yet. But I do just want to make a quick couple of points from my perspective, both as a business professional and as the incoming chair of the Bay Area Council. First and foremost, infrastructure development and maintenance is an issue with profound implications and consequences, both socially and economically. It is a dynamic that the Bay Area Council understands, and an area where we have been deeply engaged, especially as it relates to promoting economic growth and creating jobs. Last week I had lunch with Alex Marin, who has really devoted a great deal of time over the years to the work of the Bay Area Council, and we talked about how infrastructure growth has always been a cornerstone of the work of the Bay Area Council, and how it's really changed the paradigm for the Bay Area. So while we anticipate and prepare for a new infrastructure, we need to remember that the old infrastructure needs a lot of work too. And here again, there is a tremendous economic potential in addressing that need, and truly frightening consequences if we ignore it. I actually think we are at a historic turning point of sorts here in California right now. Former Governor Schwarzenegger championed infrastructure development when he was in office, and at the end of the term, when he inducted his predecessor, Pat Brown, into the California Hall of Fame, he said that Governor Brown was largely responsible for creating the California that we all know today by championing the development of our water management systems, huge expansion of our colleges and universities, and building our roads. And now with Jerry Brown in the Capitol, we have a new governor who looks back towards his father's legacy and also forward to finding ways that we can rise to the challenge today, and very importantly for tomorrow, for this fundamental issue to the Bay Area. We have a wonderful panel of experts today who can talk to you through those issues. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you the participants in the new infrastructure of the 21st century panel. First of all, from Silver Spring Networks, Executive Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer, Eric Dresselhuys. Eric, thanks for being here. From Coulomb Technologies, the founder and Chief Technical Officer, Richard Lowenthal. From Salesforce.com, Senior Vice President in the Office of the CEO, Woodson Martin. From AT&T, California, President Ken McNeely, and Ken is also a member of the Bay Area Executive Council. From SolarCity, CEO Lyndon Rive, and our moderator is the mayor of the city of San Carlos and the CEO of Syntec, Omar Ahmad. Gentlemen, please join me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Janet.
Now, we were all talking in the back
There
about
I
it's
am.
a little bit hard to follow that sports panel, but this will be a riveting group of panelists, so Omar, I will turn it over to you.
Discussion.
Riveting. I'm between sports and a Nobel laureate, so what do? You shove in infrastructure. You guys are going to be so awake, I can tell. I was making notes furiously, so one thing I do want to tell, I'm the proud mayor of the city of Good Living, also known as San Carlos. In terms of, I'm not buying a soccer team, but we do have the first organic infill soccer field in the United States. Coconut husks, and it was designed by AC Milan. So for everybody who wants to get their kids playing on a professional surface, come on over to San Carlos. By the way, can I mention that our downtown is a great place to eat? Among the other things, I am listed as the CEO of Sync Energy. I want to, in full disclosure, mention that the company was acquired. So good news, it got acquired. Bad news is I'm unemployed. So isn't that exciting? We did talk about college sports. I will tell you that I went to the University of All Things Good and Virtuous, the University of Florida. I'm a proud Gator. I think from the college football standpoint, you really need, there's something about a Southeastern Conference referee. When he can introduce his stomach as a separate entity, that is what a referee should look like. And finally, I will be doing some very brief introductions, so I hope you'll have a chance to look at the bios for my colleagues on the panel. What you're going to find is some very deep experience and some very, very tremendous people. One thing that was important that I wanted to highlight out of at least my background is that I worked for the Discovery Channel for a number of years. So I can tell you that Shark Week was invented by Steve Cheskin. We were trying to figure out what to do during a summer stunt. And he goes, how about a Shark Week? That's a dumb idea, Steve. So I should not be in television programming. But one of the things I did do was I worked with folks who were out in the field and trying to bring back the films that you loved from Discovery Channel. We were working with folks who were tagging humpback whales. We were working with guys who were chasing elephant poachers. We were working with guys who were trying to figure out what was going on with grizzly populations. And one group in particular I was working with was dealing with the mountain gorillas in Congo and in Rwanda. We hired a Brit, a guy named Gary Dash. Gary is about 5'2", maybe 100 pounds soaking wet. And he was one of the best 16mm photographers you're ever going to find. And the reason you do that is because you can literally drop one guy into the forest. He can swing a 16mm package and it'll take about 7 minutes of film. Unfortunately, the war started to really get nasty. And so we had to pay a smuggler to get him out. We flew him back to Bethesda, also known as Montgomery County, Maryland. And we took him into a restaurant and we're going through this. Now, I had been working on the rushes, and what happens is the rough film comes in, you get to see what they're doing. And this is a film about gorillas. These are amazing animals, just tremendously stunning animals. And there was this, Gary was following this troop of gorillas, and one of them was literally a 350-pound silverback. I mean, this just magnificent animal. He had also witnessed the birth of a new gorilla baby. Now, I was looking at the rushes, and one of them, you're looking at the picture of the mother and the baby, and all of a sudden the camera just is thrown to the ground and nothing happens after that. So we were in an Italian restaurant where I will confess that the waitress looked exactly like Uma Thurman. I just sat there. Yeah, more water, thank you, that's great. And what they did, he started to describe the story. I said, Gary, what happened with this footage? All of a sudden the camera went blank. He goes, oh! You need to see this. I was filming the mother and the chimp, and she was up the gorilla trail. Now, gorilla trails, for those of you who go there, is a very narrow trail. And you're wondering, how does a 350-pound silverback get up there? But they do. It's a very narrow trail. And he was filming the mother and the baby up the hill. And he threw down the camera when he heard a noise behind him, and it was the silverback coming up the trail. So Gary is stuck with a really nasty problem. He's got the mother and the baby up the hill, and he's got a 350-pound silverback coming. Okay, what do you do? And in case you're ever confronted by a silverback, here's what you do. Throw down your camera. Do not make eye contact with the gorilla. And he said, well, I immediately started acting very demure. I started eating leaves, doing whatever else I could. Just please don't kill me. Now, the restaurant is starting to get really quiet. And everyone's like, what's going to happen next? Gary says, well, then the male came over, looked at me, put his hands on my back, straddled me, and proceeded to break wind in the most magnificent fashion, then crawled over and walked away. Ever since then, if anybody threw a tantrum at Discovery Channel, we called him a wind-breaking gorilla. Now, the moral of the story, and there is one, was a couple of days later, I was sitting in the edit studio with Gary, and I looked at him and I said, Gary, seriously, a 350-pound gorilla snuck up on you? Seriously? He just shrugged. Now, I can sit here with the wisdom of several thousand miles and a lot of footage afterward. You could see what the silverback thought of his troop. You could see he was extremely protective. And what happened? Gary decided that the shot that he needed in the meantime was much more important than maintaining safety. And he physically put himself between the silverback and the mother. That was his choice, and it was a dumb one. And somehow or another, a 350-pound silverback snuck up on him. We're starting to look at infrastructure. Last night in San Carlos, we had a council member from San Bruno come and talk to us. And the issue was what happened with infrastructure and what failed. September 9th was a very bad day for those of us in San Mateo County. But it's infrastructure that made that work. What is the gorilla coming up behind us? Not only what's in the ground, what we're looking at, but as we're starting to look to the world of the future, where we're trying to build our cities in an environmentally friendly fashion and economically viable, what are the gorillas coming up, and should we be looking at them? And we've got a terrific panel to explore that. So right off the bat, I'm going to start going from my left. And Ken McNeely is the president of AT&T and a proud Bison from Howard University. And why don't you start off and tell us, what is your company doing currently?
Certainly. Here in California, we have about 38,000 employees, with our primary businesses, of course, being our wireless product and our wireline industry. We're certainly deploying IP television throughout the state, and look forward to doing more of that in the Bay Area, and certainly looking at the growth in the mobile data industry, which I'll talk a little bit about later.
Terrific. You're seated right beside Lyndon Rive, who is the CEO of SolarCity. Lyndon, we've got to figure this out. You're on the U.S. national underwater hockey team.
Correct.
And there's your teammate.
The other one.
There's actually a long story for that, but maybe for later time.
And so tell me a little bit about SolarCity and what you're doing currently.
Sure. So for those who have ever looked at getting a solar system for your house, it's actually a very complicated process. There's also a large upfront cost that you have to incur to get a solar system. SolarCity has changed that business model, and what we do is we take away all the complexity. We manage the installation process, manage all the incentives, manage all the rebates. The homeowner has no investment at all, and all they do is pay for the power that the solar system generates. That cost of the power is lower than the current cost of power from the utility. So as a homeowner, if you have two options, one, pay more for dirty power or pay less for clean power, most people choose pay less for clean power. We do this on residents and on commercial. In fact, 60% of our business is commercial.
Excellent. You're seated beside Richard Lowenthal, founder and chief technology officer of Coulomb Technologies. I do want to pull out a couple of points in your bio. You had worked at Cisco. Indeed. You had worked at Stratacom, Stardent, and Convergent, and you're also, as you said, a recovering politician. You're the former mayor of Cupertino. Tell us a little bit about Coulomb.
Guilty as charged on all those. Coulomb is building the gas station of the future. What our business is to build a EV infrastructure, electric vehicle infrastructure, so you have places to charge those vehicles. We're interested in enabling you to get off of foreign oil, to clean up the air, to get on a fuel that's cheaper for you, to buy a Chevy Volt, a Nissan Leaf, or a Tesla Roadster. We're part of a movement to bring a center of excellence to California in electric vehicles. So we see companies like Tesla Roadsters, like Better Place, like ours, and we have other companies in our industry. They're all here. So there's a growing industry here in California. It's expected to be a $10 billion industry, just the infrastructure piece alone, in 4 years. So we're going from 0 to 10 billion in 4 years.
Excellent. Woodson Martin, sitting beside Senior Vice President, Salesforce.com. Among the things, you are a proud Duke dog.
I am. Go JMU. We beat Virginia Tech this year, so we were pretty proud.
As you should be. Tell us a little bit about Salesforce.
Salesforce.com is the enterprise cloud computing company. We're headquartered here in San Francisco, where about half of our 5,300 global employees are based. We are pioneering, have been pioneering the space of enterprise cloud computing, where we're reinventing the model through which companies consume information technology today in their business. It's been an exciting story over the last decade, a lot of that playing out right here in the Bay Area. And in addition to running that very exciting business, we're also very engaged in the community in the Bay Area through the Salesforce.com Foundation, which is the philanthropic arm of our company, with more than 10,000 nonprofit organizations around the world who use our technology to run their business for free.
Interesting. And Eric Dresselhuys of Silver Spring, we actually had a conversation a little while ago, and we're reminiscing about the fact that Excited Home used to be in those buildings. But Eric is a proud Badger, and one of the things in your background I wanted to pull out was that you worked for Procter & Gamble. So with that, can you tell us a little bit about Silver Spring?
Sure. Silver Spring Networks is a networking and information company that works in clean tech. So we work across something called the smart grid, which is the notion of kind of an internet for energy. And I think apropos of this conversation, we think that smart grids are really laying a framework and an infrastructure out that can help transform smarter cities that eventually get to this notion of an internet of things. So we all know about the internet of people and the internet of entertainment and information, but this is about sensor networking and monitoring, controlling everything that generates, distributes, or uses electricity. So we are in Redwood City. We've been around since about 2002, and we are indeed in the old at-home building. So lots of folks, like Omar, come into the building, they kind of get a shiver and say, I think I've been here before.
Quite a bit. Let me stay with you for just a moment. One of the things I'm curious about, folks have been talking about smart grid technologies, and we've heard a lot about what PG&E was trying to do, rolling out their smart meters. Can you tell me, what is the state of the infrastructure today?
Well, the state of the electric infrastructure is as you kind of alluded to, we may be the 600-pound gorilla coming up your back. Most of the infrastructure in the United States was built in the post-World War II boom era. So from kind of the 1950s through the mid-1970s, we spent a lot of money on energy infrastructure in the country. Since that time, and really since about the first oil embargo in early 1970, 72, 73, the amount of money we put into T&D infrastructure in the country is about flat in nominal dollars. So on an inflation-adjusted basis, you can see that we haven't spent much. So it's old, and we have old power plants, we have old transmission and distribution lines, we have old meters on your house, and you don't have a lot of information about how you control it. And so there's been a movement that's been championed here in California. It's been championed by the president to help modernize that infrastructure in a way that's more efficient than just building more, which is our old answer. It's interesting from our perspective because we just do the networking piece in the middle. So we get to sit across this very broad array of clean technology, folks like Coulomb, folks like SolarCity, and seeing a lot of the excitement that of these new technologies that are coming, but how do they get incorporated into this very old infrastructure? And that's the problem that we really try to help address, is how to make it easier, faster, cheaper for people to change their relationship with energy.
Interesting. Richard, I'm curious, now your company is really talking about how do we start to build infrastructure for the coming of electric vehicles.
Indeed.
So we've heard about smart grid. Now, how will that play for you, and what is the current state of owning an electric vehicle today?
Well, the business is going well. We've got 700 customers. We ship to 14 countries. We've shipped 5,000 charging stations. So we're actually a bit ahead of the cars. With regard to smart grid, one of the things that I think people don't know or question is whether we're trading a problem with oil for a problem with electricity, because California is known to have its problems with blackouts and whatnot with the grid. But indeed, if we use this smart grid concepts as Silver Spring uses, there's enough energy in our grid, enough generation for the first 160 million vehicles without adding another generator. So smart grid plays a big role in our business in order to avoid having to build a bunch of infrastructure. an interesting side effect of that is that we'll see a shift from the oil business to the electricity business without adding a tremendous amount of cost on the electric side between what Eric's company does and what we do.
Interesting. Lyndon, you're pushing the idea of putting renewables into this type of system. Where are we, and what do we need to do to start to really address that?
So the solar industry gets viewed as a tremendously fast-growing industry. But in reality, it's still tiny. The market hasn't even started yet. All of the US over the last 30 years has just installed a little over 150,000 systems. The entire US. Almost half those are within Northern California. So big percentages here. But even then, less than 5% of our power comes from solar. Just in California. Within the US, it's less than 0.1%. So adoption needs to happen. It needs to happen a lot faster if we actually want to move the needle. The biggest barrier to adoption has always been the upfront cost. If you can eliminate that and sell power the way consumers buy power today and offer them a value proposition beyond the fact that it's clean, that it's actually clean and cheaper, we're starting to see adoption happen a lot faster.
Interesting. Ken, I'm holding an iPad. Sorry, it's generation 1. But we are starting to see landlines that people used to have in their homes are starting to disappear. People are going to more wireless devices. They're going more and more unplugged. You're at the heart of that discussion. What is the state of the infrastructure today?
That's a very good question. I did notice the iPad. One of the things that's really driving the change in the infrastructure and the infrastructure needs is really the use of data. We used to walk around with a telephone in our pockets that occasionally would provide access to the internet or email. Now we are walking around with computers in our pockets that occasionally make a phone call. And that's totally changing the way this consumer behavior is changing the way the infrastructure has to be deployed. The iPhone and other smartphones use 25% more bandwidth than a voice phone. The iPad itself uses about 40% more bandwidth than your average voice phone. The data on our network over the last 4 years, since the proliferation of the smartphone era, is up 8,000% in 4 years. And this is the tip of the iceberg. The smartphone and the iPad tablets like that certainly are the future. And so what's required is a real shift from a voice-driven mobile network to a data-driven mobile network. And that means increased capacity, it means increased penetration, and spectrum allocation. Companies like AT&T, we've invested $19 billion in infrastructure upgrades over the last year. We've told Wall Street this year we're going to be investing $21 billion in infrastructure upgrades as we move to 4th generation LTE, long-term evolution, which is the real gold standard in network architecture. And we're talking mobile data speeds of 80 to 100 meg, which many times 4 to 5 times faster than your wireline network.
Interesting. I want to just go back to that number, 8,000% growth?
8,000%.
You guys must be hiring like crazy.
Well, that's the traffic demands on the network. I mean, the 8,000% is the data that was on the network. It used to be 80% of the network traffic was voice. Now more than 80%, almost 80% of the network traffic's data. Because rather than making a phone call, you're sending a text, you're streaming video. So it really has changed with the behavior of the consumer.
And that consumer behavior is really now changing how the infrastructure has to be looked at and what you're looking for in terms of engineering. Interesting. Woodson, one of the things that you're doing is this notion of cloud computing. And we just heard that people are going more and more mobile. I know that Salesforce, the mobile aspect of what you're doing is critical. What is the state of infrastructure, and how do people who are in the enterprise start to think about this?
Great question. So Ken paints an interesting picture. Obviously, we all know, because everybody here probably has at least one mobile device that's talking to the network today. While you sit here, a lot of people are looking at them right now.
Guilty.
This shift, there is a fundamental shift that we see in the way that people are using technology today, what we call this shift to, so a lot of people know about cloud computing. We're talking a lot today about what we call Cloud 2, which is the shift to a social, mobile, and open way of communicating, collaborating, and computing. And a huge part of that is what we see with the adoption of mobile devices. As every business process a company may want to engage in shifts to the mobile device, right? And we need to be able to consume all our data and all of our business information. That way we communicate with our employees, with our customers. Everything is happening through those mobile devices. Now, for that to happen, obviously behind the scenes there is an enormous consumer of power. We're talking about power generation, we're talking about power distribution here. One of the fastest growing methods for consuming electrical energy today is data centers. And so while we think the innovation we're seeing in distribution and in generation is fantastic, we think that there needs to be a fundamental rethinking of the consumption side as well in areas like data centers. So just to give you an example from the world of cloud computing, we operate an infrastructure today that serves 100,000 companies from 3 relatively small data centers around the world today. If you think about what it would take for those organizations to run their business data and applications on their own, 100,000 companies, a couple of servers each for their production environments, a copy of that for their backup environments, for their development environments, and quickly you're into millions of servers that are running in data centers around the world, consuming gigawatts of power. And by contrast with the model that we are operating today, we have 4,000 servers serving the needs of all those 100,000 companies today. The efficiency of the model that we're using is a fraction of 1% of the energy consumption and the carbon footprint of classic computing models. And so we think that the adoption of this technology, digital technology, presents not only challenges for the powering the technology, but also incredible opportunities for efficiency through a shared multi-tenant approach like the one that we take.
So let me push that just a little bit, because I want to ask each of you about where you see the infrastructure ought to be in about 10 years. But most people here are familiar with the term Moore's Law, which basically says you're going to get every 18 months a doubling in performance. Do you see that in cloud computing in terms of energy, in terms of compute power? Is that maintaining? Are we still on Moore's Law? And use that, and where do you expect us to be in 10 years?
Well, what we're seeing when we look at the compute cycle, the compute power required behind a model like cloud computing, and obviously Salesforce is not the only company engaged in this model. Google's doing it, Amazon does it with their web services offerings. There is, if we look at the aggregate basis, what is the impact we are having on compute cycles per kilowatt hour of electricity, for example? We'll see orders of magnitude growth in efficiency, probably much greater than what we've seen with Moore's Law and a doubling in 18 months at a compute cycle time basis, because the infrastructure is shared and because latency is eliminated, is largely reduced through this shared systems model behind cloud computing. And if people don't understand that idea, it's a simple one. If I have a technology infrastructure that is serving the needs of many, many, many users and many, many, many customers from the same physical environment, then the average utilization is, of course, aggregated across all of those user communities to maximize the amount of the infrastructure that's used at any point in time. And that efficiency is probably a bigger multiplier than Moore's Law in terms of the aggregate impact in the economy.
Bigger. Interesting. Eric, I'd like your take on that, because we did talk about power consumption and the fact that we're dealing with a knowledge economy.
How would you take on
Yeah, I think it does exist, and I think actually you can see two kind of well-known Silicon Valley laws at work within the infrastructure and energy space. Certainly Moore's law in our world from a networking and computing perspective, we are seeing those kind of precipitous drops. I think it's a little different in some parts of energy because you're really dealing with some pretty low-level material science. This is stuff coming out of the labs at Berkeley and Stanford, and the breakthroughs happen in big chunks in energy. And so I don't think that's the steady curve. You tend to see more stair steps as you have technical breakthroughs. But the other law that we see coming into play here around energy efficiency is Metcalfe's law, which we don't think of normally within an energy context, but Metcalfe's law was the value of a network is the square of the number of participants. And what we're finding in the smart grid space is that by connecting all of the things that generate, distribute, and use energy, we can take a lot of the waste out of the system. And there's just an immense amount that's in the old system that was kind of offline and not connected, that the answer to solving the problem was always just to kind of over-provision. You'd overbuild, you'd over-provision, you'd have to kind of use that cloud computing example. All of these servers out there that were only being used at a fraction of their potential capacity. And we have that happen throughout the entire distribution network. We build everything in electricity, as an example, and water and gas and others are the same way, have been built to handle the incidental peak consumption at that highest moment ever, with almost no means of balancing or mitigating that peak. So you had to kind of design everything for that hottest day when everything was turned on. And that's why you saw the rolling brownouts and the blackouts in part. By just managing that better, we can take a meaningful amount out from a waste perspective. You don't see it or feel it. It doesn't make your life less comfortable in any way, shape, or form, but we can be just a heck of a lot more efficient in how we build out the infrastructure.
Very interesting. Ken, we talked about the change in consumer behavior. Are you seeing this mirrored in the enterprise? And where do you see, you're obviously going to be investing with billions dollars. Where are we going to be in 10 years?
Absolutely. Certainly, many of the devices that have been implemented, put on the market, are certainly focused on consumers. But we're gradually seeing adoption in the enterprise space as well. I mean, the transition from smartphones to smart computing is certainly one that is significant. Telepresence and these other kinds of video conferencing devices and services that you're seeing will only proliferate, I think, in the next 5 and 10 years. I've often kidded that I think we're moving to an area where we're all going to be holograms at some point, being beamed into our conference rooms. But
I think most people would prefer if I was that way.
But certainly, as we build additional bandwidth, the entrepreneurial spirit, particularly here in California, down in Silicon Valley, they are finding ways to utilize that additional bandwidth. And as we build, manufacturers, entrepreneurs are finding ways of bringing that technology, utilizing that bandwidth, and bringing it into a very creative space.
Interesting.
A thought on that?
Please.
Just maybe a point of illustration there to Ken's point. You're carrying an iPad here today. Over the course of the last 3 weeks, we've deployed those iPads to more than 2,000 of our customer-facing employees today and have completely reinvented the way that we present to and communicate with our customers today around these new technologies. We're definitely seeing them being adopted in the enterprise and having an enormous impact on productivity, and for us specifically, collaboration.
Interesting. Lyndon, I'm curious about something. I think everybody would love the adoption of renewables to follow Moore's law and to have that exponential growth. Are we going to see that in 10 years? Is it going to be thin film transistors? What should we look for?
So the Moore's law, in terms of adoption, I do think that will happen. So the industry has consistently adopted the solar industry in the US has consistently grown about 40% per year over the last 5 years. I actually think that will increase, not decrease. In terms of technology, it's not going to be as dramatic. It's going to be a constant reduction in price. The technology is an old technology. It's been around for 40 years. It's extremely well proven, and it can handle severe weather conditions. Now the focus, and the whole industry's focus, is how to reduce the cost, not necessarily increase the efficiency. That's an upside. I mean, that's the holy grail, lower cost, higher efficiency. But the current efficiency is good enough. Get the current efficiency at a lower cost is what the industry is focused on. I see the cost reduction between 5 and 8% as it's more than just the technology. You also have infrastructure cost. Our company, as an example, we have 580 employees this time last year. We're now just under 1,200 employees. So more than doubled in 1 year. And it's because you need people to put this on the roof. There's no other way. You can't put that virtually because it doesn't work. You can't have that done in China. That doesn't work. Somebody has to put it on the roof. So we create local workforce. It's great for the local community. We have 25 different warehouses, but you have to build that infrastructure, and that just takes time. We think we can double every year, but it gets harder every time you say that.
That's interesting. Richard, I pointed out a couple of points in your bio because I wanted to draw something out here. You come from large compute and networks, and now you've moved into electricity. And I think we're starting to see, you know, we asked it with the Moore's Law question, we're starting to see this. Can you draw this? I mean, does this make sense that we're going to look at next generation infrastructure really coming from compute-centric folks?
Yeah, we definitely are, and from networking. And in fact, our company we built with networking people because that's the key to making the charging infrastructure work. It's interesting that we combine the technologies of all the panelists here. The gas station of the future is at your workplace or in your home. And what you'll do to that is you'll plug your car in, you'll pay, the payment will go through the AT&T network and go back to a data center. The energy will be controlled by companies like Silver Spring. But the gas station, the physical constriction of the gas station will go away. You'll be charging where you park anyway. And most of the fueling that everybody here will do in time will switch to kind of the parking meter model. So you walk up to your parking meter, you swipe a credit card, or you swipe an RFID card. It travels through the AT&T network back to our data center, maybe the one in London, maybe the one in Hong Kong, maybe the one in Dallas. We do our computing there. We charge the vehicle. We use smart grid concepts because vehicles are interesting because they're patient, right? They have a battery in them. So if I don't need my car till 8 in the morning, then I don't really need to charge it at the peak in the afternoon when the grid is already tired. So working with the other companies here, we can wait, well, that car doesn't really need to start charging until midnight, so that's what we do. So we use communication, we use the smart grid concepts, we use the ability to have the car be patient and wait for clean energy. All of those things tied together to make a great infrastructure of the future. The result is that the consumer is going to pay 2 cents a mile to drive their vehicle instead of 14 cents. So we're putting all these things together basically to bring a value to the consumer, and that's the driver of the industry going forward, is the economic driver of a great deal on driving your vehicle.
Fascinating. Gentlemen, one thing that I've heard from this discussion is just how much we are going to be investing in this new infrastructure. We had a panel previously on education, and we want education to work to move kids to four-year colleges. I'm curious, just very quickly from the panel, as you are hiring, if you could tell the universities or the high schools, what should kids know coming out so that you can hire them, what would that be? Let me start.
Well, I don't know if there's one thing. We started a curriculum. We developed a curriculum with a number of educators that PG&E and others have helped to implement in Oakland and in San Francisco that we've now taken to the high schools on smart grid. Because what I would say is we all, and probably most people in this room, just take it all for granted. We take energy for granted, just like we take the highways and the bridges and the water infrastructure for granted. And so what we found is that kids will engage in it if you tell them about it, but this just isn't anything anybody's talking about, or at least hasn't been historically. So I guess my one thing was the first step is you got to start the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, we're a high-tech company. We're very interested in the focus on the development of engineering skills. Certainly electrical engineering, software engineering for us are very important ones because we think obviously for the labor market and where we're looking to hire. But I think that beyond that, there is an important onus on the educational systems to be pushing innovation as a core value. I think when we think about the skills that we need to be competitive in the Bay Area, to be competitive in the US, that students will need as they gain jobs in a global job market, we need to be focusing on aiming our students as they're studying toward innovative technologies. How many of our students today are thinking about green tech when they are thinking about pursuing a degree in engineering? How many students are thinking about cloud computing instead of traditional models? Are we aiming people at the newer ideas early enough in their educational experience? And I think that's a good question for us to think about how we infuse in, but obviously a focus on engineering would be great.
Terrific. Ken, you're investing billions, literally. Who would you like to tell folks?
You know, I would say I totally agree with innovation. I think we have to nurture creativity and curiosity amongst our students, because the jobs that our current middle school kids today will have don't even exist today. And so being able to compete in a global competitive environment is going to be absolutely critical, and really be able to think about that next big opportunity, that next big device.
Excellent. Lyndon.
So when we look at hiring, the most important thing is for us is attitude. Are you passionate about some of the challenges that we face? In terms of trade, electrical and construction actually fits very nicely for solar. The learning curve is small and to get them transitioned over. But from an educational perspective, it would be great if and we're starting to see some momentum of this, is to educate the kids what the current infrastructure is costing us. Not in terms of actual infrastructure cost, but in terms of health benefits, air pollution, everything else that's broader than that, so that they are passionate about changing us out. Because if we don't make that change, that cost is always going to drag down on us. And the apples to apples comparison won't occur. You're competing against an infrastructure that's been subsidized for 75 years, direct subsidy, and none of the effects of that infrastructure has been calculated into the cost. So educating everybody on that as they get out into adulthood will create a new sense of passion.
That's right. So for us, you know, we have a broad spectrum of jobs, just like you heard with SolarCity. You know, what happens when we sell a charging station? There are 3 people go to work for a day, 1 person to make it and 2 to install it. So there are a lot of local jobs, and we can use great contractors just like we can use great engineers. The one advice I'd give is I'd ask people to not go with such a broad view of like getting your grades and getting out of school, but rather be great at something and find something that resonates with you, whether it's electrical engineering or physics or being the world's greatest electrical contractor. We're looking for somebody who has passion for their field, and we'll hire them every time.
Passion, innovation, and it sounds like good, solid, basic skills. Gentlemen, we've only got a few minutes left, so what I'm going to do is, if I could just go around, we've only scratched the surface, but we've got this audience today. If there's one thing that this audience should take away from this discussion, what would that be?
You know, from my perspective, thank you very much for inviting me. It's that you know, technology requires infrastructure. It's not magic, and our ability to be able to advance that infrastructure is so critically important. You know, we talked a lot about mobile phones. We've moved from an era of mobile phones to basically digital portals now. Your mobile phone was intended to be a mobile device, to move you know, as you were carrying it, walking down the street. Now people are sitting in cafes, in their offices, in their homes, streaming video on these devices. And it's very important that we now upgrade and improve this infrastructure to be able to change with the behavior of the consumer. And I believe in California there are some real challenges there. In Texas, I can build out infrastructure and perhaps through the permitting process for 3 months. Some instances in California could take 3 years to do the very same thing. And it's very important that we understand that if we intend to remain competitive.
I'd say one of the big things that the solar industry has struggled with is that it is still viewed as expensive. I'd like to eliminate that stigma and say that today, any one of you can look at getting clean power at a lower cost than you're currently paying for power, whether you're a building owner, a commercial owner, or a resident. Look at it, it's not more expensive, and it is a cheap alternative. Just pay for the power.
So in our industry, what we would like to see is to have the Bay Area embrace an opportunity to be a world leader, in our case, in electric transportation. We have the chance. We have the leadership companies here. What would make a big difference is if you would all get to your policymakers and encourage them to support and make this industry grow here. We're the fortunate awardee of a $37 million stimulus program, which will help us create some jobs in the short term. But we'd much rather create an industry, and we have a chance to do that. So if in our case, if every city council says we're going to embrace the electric vehicle, we're going to enable it to come to our city, we're going to take the pain of allocating some parking spots so that you can park your electric vehicle and charge it. I would really like to see the policymakers here, local policymakers, embrace this new industry and help us get good, deep roots right here in Silicon Valley and San Francisco.
I think we can look forward to taking that challenge up.
So I think am I still broadcasting?
No.
No?
Oh, now it is.
Okay.
Hey, thank you very much. I hope
all
you
about
can
the
hear
love.
me.
Low-tech
I'll
solution.
keep it quick because it's kind of uncomfortable.
Think how it is for me.
I think I have a simple idea, which is as we look to the future and as we look to the infrastructure of the next 10 years, we need to also be looking at new models. We're hearing about new models for distribution of power. We're hearing about new models for generation. And I think we also need to be thinking about new models for consumption. And certainly at Salesforce.com, that's where we're focused with cloud computing.
And I guess my ask of everybody would be just pay attention, and what that means. If you're just an individual here at the conference, go home. If you're a PG&E customer, you can log on to pgne.com and see all sorts of information about your energy consumption at a very granular level that'll help you make better choices. I bet you most people in this room have never done that. And if you're a business, you can do the same. If you're a mayor of a city, and I think the folks from Coulomb and SolarCity were being nice to you. If you're looking for an action step, if we just made the permitting process for implementing rooftop solar, implementing electric vehicle charging, standardized and simple across the Bay Area. It would have a huge impact. And I know in a world where budgets are tight, it's tough to go out and ask people for money. But my guess is that this group of people could do that, and you'd actually save money because you'd have less labor and less handoff, and less paperwork to go do. So, why don't the Bay Area step up? Northern California standardize one permitting process for the implementation of clean technologies in this town, and set the pace for the rest of the country.
Well, if there's anybody from ABAG, let's talk about taking that up. One thing, we've been talking about infrastructure, and we talked about what the gorillas are who are coming up behind us. Just a show of hands, how many people here remember the bicentennial? Good chunk. Can you remember what technology looked like in '76? We were renting our phones from my good friend at the end. We couldn't own a phone. You actually had to lease these things. Mobile phones, even the brick that Gordon Gekko had didn't exist. Think how far we've come. Now I want to put this thought in your head as we start to look forward. I had my godson born a couple of weeks ago, little Z-Man. We call him Zakaria, but he's Z-Man. What's interesting to note is that the kids who are born today are going to retire on our country's tricentennial. We may not be around here to see what they're doing, but the decisions we make today are definitely going to affect their future and what that tricentennial looks like. And it's our job to make certain that that future is something that they're going to look forward to. Please join me in thanking all these panelists.
Great job.